The February air in Georgia had that strange mix of chill and humidity that made everything feel damp and heavy. It clung to your skin, your clothes, your thoughts. At the county shelter's auction yard, it also clung to the silence. Not the usual silence of disinterest, but one so sharp it felt like judgment. Next up, lot number 47, German Shepherd, male. Age unknown. The auctioneer barked into a crackling microphone. His voice echoed through the makeshift yard, bouncing off rusted farm equipment and cages holding everything from chickens to broken-down tractors. People shuffled their boots in the dirt. They weren't here for dogs. They were here for fertilizer, for hoses, for something cheap and useful. In the back, arms crossed over my jacket, I watched. I wasn't there to buy anything. My name's Jessica Taylor, 34 years old, veteran, combat nurse, barely sleeping, just trying to live quietly on a 3-acre stretch of land outside Riverdale. I already had 2 angry rescue cats and an arthritic lab named Cooper. My house had no room. My heart? Well, maybe it had a corner left. Then I saw him. They dragged the German Shepherd out like he was just another broken tool. His fur was dull, matted in places, scars spider-webbed across his back. He walked with a limp so severe, his back right leg barely touched the ground. The auctioneer didn't bother sugarcoating it. Aggressive, not good for families, surrendered by owner. May have to be put down today if there's no interest. $1. That's all it started at. The dog flinched. As someone coughed nearby, his head sank low. His body trembled. Not from rage, from fear. That wasn't the posture of a threat, that was trauma. People looked away, shifted uncomfortably, whispered. But his eyes, those haunted amber eyes, locked with mine. And just, for a second, I saw something. Not a threat, not a monster. Something broken in the same way I was. Before I knew what I was doing, my hand was in the air. Sold. $1. To the lady in the back. A few people chuckled. One man muttered, "Poor soul just bought a death wish." They had no idea. That $1 would change everything. For him, for me, for a town that thought they already knew what a threat looked like. They didn't. Shadow hadn't even come home yet, but he'd already started to pull me out of a silence I didn't know was killing me, and I had no idea just how deep the war inside that dog still ran. Shadow didn't walk into my life. He limped into it, flinching, shaking, silent. The drive home from the county auction wasn't long. 12 miles of cracked pavement, pine trees leaning like they'd seen too much, and fields that never seemed to change. But it felt like forever with him in the passenger seat, pressed so hard against the door you'd think he wanted to disappear into the frame. I didn't speak. Not at first. What do you say to a creature that doesn't trust the world anymore? Instead, I focused on keeping the ride smooth, avoided potholes, turned the radio off, left the windows cracked just enough to let in the wind, maybe hoping it could carry some of the ghosts out. When we pulled into my gravel driveway, Cooper, my 13-year-old Labrador, was already watching from the porch. Half-blind, arthritic, but still sharp in his own way. The 2 rescue cats, Max and Ruby, watched from the window like judgmental royalty. Shadow didn't move. I opened the door, waited. Nothing. "All right," I whispered, trying not to let him hear the doubt in my voice. "I guess we're doing this the hard way." 20 minutes. That's how long it took to convince him to let me touch him again. 20 minutes of crouching in the cold, not making eye contact, letting him sniff my hand over and over before he finally let me lift him out of the truck. And even then, he didn't bolt. He didn't explore. He stood completely still at the edge of my porch, head low, body tense, breathing shallow, like he wasn't sure this was real, like he didn't believe safety existed anymore. "It's okay," I said, crouching down, slow and even. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." He didn't, believe me, but he followed me inside anyway. I set up a space for him in the corner of the living room. Dog bed, water bowl, some kibble that smelled better than it probably tasted. I didn't expect gratitude. I just wanted him to know he wasn't alone. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He stood for hours. That night, I laid in bed listening to the rain tap against the roof. February storms in Georgia are unpredictable. 1 minute just drizzle, the next a full orchestra of thunder. And for people like me who came back from places we don't talk about, thunder doesn't always sound like weather. The first boom snapped me upright, sweat already cold on my skin. My brain was in Kandahar, my body was in Riverdale. The second boom wasn't thunder, it was something breaking. I ran downstairs barefoot, heart pounding. Found Shadow in the living room, clawing. At the floorboards, blood on his paws, teeth bared in a silent scream. He wasn't there anymore either. I froze. For a second, I wasn't sure who needed saving more, him or me. "Hey," I said, not moving closer. "Hey, it's just thunder. You're safe. You're here. You're not there anymore." It wasn't enough, so I sat on the floor, a few feet away, just out of reach. And I talked about Cooper's snoring, about the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, about how I still couldn't find where I packed my winter gloves, anything to keep my voice calm, steady, real. Eventually, the growling stopped. His breathing slowed. He collapsed, not near me, just near enough that his body brushed my leg. It was the first time he made contact on his own. In that moment, soaked, in sweat surrounded by silence and rain, I realized something I hadn't let myself think until then. This dog didn't just need rescue. He had been to war, and war wasn't done with him yet. The next few days were like walking through a minefield, but slower. Shadow refused to eat if I was in the room. He'd only pee in the farthest corner of the fenced yard. He startled at every sound. Door hinges, car engines, even the microwave beeping. When I reached to pet him, he flinched. Once, he snapped. Not to bite, just a reflex. The kind you don't control when you've been conditioned to brace for pain. It was like looking in a mirror. I worked at Riverdale Animal Clinic part-time. I asked Dr. Ben Williams, our lead vet and one of the few people I trusted, if he'd come do a house call instead of dragging Shadow into the clinic. Ben was a man of few words, but he saw more than most. It took him 15 minutes just to "Get close. There's a tattoo inside his ear," he said, shining his penlight gently. Military style? This wasn't just someone's backyard pet, Jess. This dog was trained, probably served. Shadow didn't flinch during the exam. Not because he trusted us, but because compliance had been trained into him. Then probably beaten out again later. He's malnourished, could have parasites. That leg, that was a bad break, healed wrong. Might need surgery later, Ben muttered, packing up his bag. Then he looked me dead in the eye. But that's not his biggest issue. You know what it is? PTSD, I said quietly. Ben nodded. Just like his new owner. He left without saying more. He didn't need to. That night, Shadow curled up near the door, facing it, guarding it. I slept with the light on, not because I was scared of him, because I knew what it meant to be afraid of the dark. Shadow didn't sleep that first night. Not really. He stood in the far corner of the living room as if trying to disappear into the wall, refusing to touch the bed I had laid out for him. The bowl of kibble remained untouched. And even though I turned out the lights and curled up on the couch to give him space, I could still feel those eyes on me. Wide, alert, haunted. At around 2 a.m., Georgia's unpredictable February sky erupted in a storm. The thunder rolled in, shaking the rafters, a sound I hadn't quite gotten used to even after years back from deployment. The first boom had me bolt upright, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. The second came with a crash, glass, wood, from downstairs. I rushed down barefoot and found Shadow in full-blown panic. He was digging frantically at the hardwood floor, his claws splintering, blood already smearing across the boards. He was panting hard, chest heaving, eyes wild and unseeing. He wasn't in my living room anymore. No, he was somewhere else entirely. Hey, easy, I said, kneeling a few feet away, hands open, voice steady despite the way my own memories clawed at the edge of my mind. You're okay. You're in Riverdale, Georgia. It's just thunder. You're safe. He bared his teeth, not in aggression, but in terror. A warning, a plea. I didn't move. just kept talking, low and steady. I told him about the weather, forecast, about Cooper, the old Labrador, who once ate a whole pie off the counter and then slept for 18 hours. I told him about the leaky faucet upstairs I kept meaning to fix. I talked until the storm softened, until the whites of his eyes weren't so stark, until his trembling slowed and he sank to the floor, exhausted. His head rested just near my foot, close enough for warmth, far enough to retreat if needed. I didn't move for a long time. By dawn, I realized what I already suspected. Shadow wasn't just scared. He was broken, like me. The next morning, he still wouldn't eat from the bowl. So I poured a handful of kibble into my palm and sat quietly nearby. I didn't look at him, didn't call him. I just waited. It took him 45 minutes to creep forward. Another 15 before his cold nose touched my hand. Then, quick as lightning, he grabbed one piece of food and backed away. But it was something. We repeated the ritual the next day and the day after that. Each time he stayed a little closer, took a little more. Trust, I reminded myself, was not a light switch. It was a sunrise. At the clinic, Dr. Ben Williams, our town's only vet and a good friend, agreed to come out and do a house visit. I didn't want to risk Shadow reliving whatever trauma the shelter or a clinic might trigger. Ben arrived with his calm energy and a bag full of supplies. He didn't push, just sat near Shadow for a long while, letting the dog sniff, retreat, come back, sniff again. There's a tattoo inside his ear, Ben murmured finally, shining a penlight. Military-style identification. Jess, this dog wasn't just stray. He was trained, hard. Ben barely got through the basics, a blood sample, a quick look at the limp, before Shadow gave a low warning growl. Not a threat, just a limit. And we respected it. He's malnourished, probably riddled with parasites, Ben said as he packed up. That leg was broken, badly, never set properly. He's got nerve damage from that for sure. But then Ben looked at me. Really looked. Those aren't his worst wounds, though. I knew what he meant. PTSD, I said quietly. Ben nodded. Yeah, same as you. Shadow started to explore the house in cautious half-circles. Cooper ignored him mostly, offering only a wheezy sigh if the shepherd got too close. Max and Ruby, the feline overlords, had retreated to the attic and were staging protests. He wouldn't eat if I watched, wouldn't drink unless I left the room. The smallest noise, a slammed cabinet, a dropped spoon, sent him skittering. Still, he stayed. A few days later, my world narrowed again. A police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Sheriff Thomas Winslow stepped out, his weathered face unreadable. Beneath his department-issue hat, "Jessica," he said, getting right to it. "We got a complaint about a dangerous dog." I folded my arms, tried to look calm. "From Ethan Bradley, I'm guessing." Winslow nodded. "Says you brought home. Trained attack dog. Military grade. Says his granddaughter got scared riding past your place. That dog hasn't left my yard," I said steady. "And he's scared of his own shadow, no pun intended." "Mind if I take a look?" I led him around the side. Shadow was crouched under the porch, ears flat, eyes locked on the sheriff. Winslow crouched low, making himself small. "Easy now," he said gently. "Not here to hurt you." He looked at me. "Military dog?" "Ben thinks so. There's a tattoo. But no records, just trauma." Winslow sighed. "My brother-in-law trains canines at Fort Benning. I recognize the stance. This dog's seen combat." His tone softened. "Look, Jessica, the town has rules. 2 weeks. Prove he's safe, or I have to enforce the ordinance." He handed me a yellow slip. "And Jessica, yeah? Bradley's pushing for a vote to ban military dogs from town altogether." After he left, I sat on the porch steps, Shadow at my side, head resting against my knee. I looked down into those tired amber eyes and saw myself looking back. "We're not done yet," I whispered, and somehow I knew. Neither was he. The sheriff's visit left a weight in the air. Not just because of the warning he'd given me, but because of what it meant. This quiet life I'd tried to build, of anonymity, of peace, was crumbling beneath the scrutiny of a town that feared what it didn't understand. And at the center of it all was Shadow, the dog I'd bought for $1 who now carried the full weight of judgment. But there was something else buried beneath the sheriff's words. Military dog. The way Shadow moved, reacted, shut down, then flickered back to attention when I gave a command in just the right tone. There was a soldier inside that dog, buried deep, and maybe, just maybe, I could still reach him. I started where I knew best, with food. This time I didn't just leave kibble in the bowl. I sat near it, on the floor, silent, calm, every gesture slow, every breath deliberate. You, eat when you're ready, I told him softly. No rush. He watched me, still, mistrustful. But his stomach betrayed him eventually. After nearly an hour of standoff, he edged forward, snatched a piece from my hand, then retreated. But not as far. We repeated this ritual again, then again. Day by day, inch by inch, the wall between us thinned. And then came the day I made the mistake of speaking without thinking. Sit, I murmured absently, my eyes half on the notes Ben had sent over from Shadow's bloodwork. Shadow moved like a switch had been flipped, his back straightened, his ears perked. He sat. Instantly. I froze. He stared ahead, body alert, waiting. I swallowed. Platz, I said quietly. He dropped down. Bleib. He stayed. Fuss. He moved into heel position, just behind my knee, precise, controlled. Not like a pet. Like a soldier. Oh my God, I whispered. You understand German. Shadow's tail. Gave one tentative flick. I wasn't imagining it. I was looking at a ghost of someone who had once been lethal, disciplined, trusted, and then discarded like trash. That night, while brushing his now slightly fuller coat, my fingers caught on. Something under the matted fur near his neck. A small metal tag, worn, partially corroded. The numbers barely visible, but I saw enough. Delta 7. Not a name. A designation. He wasn't just some random German shepherd. He had a unit. A role. A handler. And if Delta 7 had been his working name, then someone, somewhere, had loved this dog like a brother. Someone had fought beside him and lost him. The next morning I did what any ex-military medic with stubborn instincts would do. I made calls. I called Fort Benning's public affairs office. I was passed around, like a hot potato, from one confused corporal to an equally confused specialist. Finally, a clipped voice came through. Major Harrison. What's this about a dog? I explained. I believe I have a retired military working dog. He was sold at a county auction. No paperwork, no chip. His ear reads Delta 7. Silence. Then, if you've come into possession of government property, Ms. Taylor, you're required to return it immediately. He's not a crate. He's a dog. A traumatized, injured veteran who was dumped in a kill shelter. I'll send a transport team tomorrow. No, I said, heat rising. Not until I get answers. His service record, medical history, who trained him, and how the hell he ended up in an auction yard next to a busted tractor and a cage of chickens. Those are classified. Then I guess I'll call my congressman, I snapped, and ask why taxpayer dollars were used to train war dogs, only to discard them like broken tools. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll look into it, Major Harrison said coolly. But don't expect much. He hung up, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just about saving Shadow anymore. This was about fighting for what was right. Thursday came, the town council meeting. Ethan Bradley's petition to ban military dogs from Riverdale had made the agenda. The courtroom-style chamber was packed. Locals who never showed up for anything more than bake sales now filled every chair, every standing corner, whispering rumors and judgments. I stood alone at the podium, hands steady, voice calm. My name is Jessica Taylor, I began. And I'm here to speak for someone who can't defend himself. I told them everything I knew about the auction, the scars, the behavior, the commands, the tattoo, the terror in his eyes when thunder rolled across the sky. "He's not dangerous," I said. "He's hurt, like any veteran who comes home with more wounds on the inside than out." I held up the tag. "He's Delta 7, and he was left to die." Ethan Bradley stood. "My granddaughter was almost attacked by that dog," the crowd murmured. I turned to him. "She rode past my house. Shadow has never left the fence line, not once, and he runs from strangers. He doesn't chase them." "You calling my granddaughter a liar?" "I'm saying fear makes people see things that aren't real. I've seen it in soldiers, in civilians, and now in this town." The council president leaned forward. "Ms. Taylor, do you have any formal training with animals like this?" "I was a combat nurse with the 31st Combat Support Hospital," I said. "I've seen PTSD, treated it, and now I'm treating it. Again, in the body of a dog who served our country and was thrown away." A quiet voice interrupted from the back. "I'd like to say something." It was Dr. Ben Williams. He stepped forward, removed his glasses, and looked the council square in the eye. "I've examined this dog twice. He's not aggressive. He's traumatized. He deserves rehabilitation, not extermination." He handed them a folder, medical records, a proposed safety plan, a training protocol, my promise, and the town council. They gave us 30 days, 1 month to prove Shadow was safe, 1 month to earn back the life he'd once been promised. The 30 days the council gave us didn't feel like a lifeline. It felt like a countdown, like a clock ticking above Shadow's head. Every morning when I stepped outside, I saw the whispers in the eyes of my neighbors. Some crossed the road. When I walked by with Shadow, others just watched, mouths tight like they were waiting for the dog to explode. But Shadow didn't explode. He barely existed in the world outside my porch. His world was small, my kitchen, the edge of the yard, the cushion beside the stairs. Trust wasn't given. It had to be earned. So that's what I did. We started each day with a ritual. Food, not just tossed into a bowl, but offered hand to muzzle. I made him work for it, gently. Sit, stay, heel. Commands he once knew as reflex came slower now, buried, beneath layers of trauma. But every time he obeyed even just a little, he got a piece of trust back. Then came walks, short ones at first. Just the perimeter of the yard, then up the driveway, then down the road, leash taut between us like a lifeline. Any sudden noise, a truck backfiring, a screen door slamming, sent him into alert mode, body stiff, eyes scanning. But over time, he stopped trying to bolt. He started looking at me. Jake Thornton entered our lives like a drill sergeant disguised as a farm boy. He ran a rehabilitation center an hour away, mostly for military dogs retired from service, but also for handlers who couldn't handle civilian life. He took one look at Shadow and nodded. This one's seen combat, no doubt. Jake was a blunt instrument with a soft center. He didn't coddle, but he understood. And most importantly, Shadow responded to him. "He's got muscle memory," Jake explained. "You can't undo it, but you can redirect it." So we trained. Every Tuesday and Friday we drove out to the Second Chance Canine compound, where other shepherds barked from fenced yards and veterans worked in the dirt beside them. Jake showed me how to guide Shadow through obstacle courses, how to reward without overexciting, how to anchor his spirals when his brain slipped into the dark. And Shadow? Shadow transformed, not overnight, but steadily. By week 2, he no longer flinched when a car passed. By week 3, he let Jake pet his flank without growling. By week 4, he brought me his leash, dropped it at my feet like a quiet question. Still, Riverdale didn't care about progress. Rumors grew legs and ran wild. "Did you hear that dog was trained to kill?" "My cousin said he can sniff out guns. What kind of dog does that?" "Keep your kids inside, just in case." One morning I found a sign nailed to my fence, hand-painted in red, "Dangerous dog. Enter at your own risk." Shadow stared at it. Tail. Lo, he didn't know the words, but he knew the intent. Later that day, I was planting marigolds along the walkway, trying to reclaim some normalcy. when the sound of bicycle wheels caught my ear. Two girls, one I recognized as Ethan Bradley's granddaughter, the other, a friend I didn't know. They slowed near the fence. Emily pointed. "That's him," I heard her say. Then her friend did something I'll never forget. She picked up a rock, threw it. It hit Shadow square in the side. He yelped, not with anger, with confusion, with pain. Another rock followed. Laughter before I could scream. They were gone. Shadow had already hidden behind the shed, shivering. I lost it, not at Shadow, at the world, at the way people turned fear into cruelty. That evening I drove straight to the Bradley farm, fists clenched and heart pounding. "Margaret." Bradley answered the door, her face drawn. "Ethan," she called. "It's Jessica Taylor." He came to the porch with a frown. "What's this about?" "Your granddaughter threw rocks at my dog today." He blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" "She was with a friend." They laughed. Shadow didn't retaliate, he ran. Ethan's jaw tightened. "My Emily wouldn't do that." I saw it. He hesitated. Even if she did, maybe she was protecting herself. He was behind a 6-foot fence and scared of his own shadow. Pun not intended. Silence. "You think that dog's a hero," he finally said, "but I think he's a time bomb." I stepped closer. "That time bomb detected IEDs. He's the reason men like you. Sit on porches drinking iced tea while someone else watches your granddaughter grow up." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't have to. I walked away knowing I hadn't changed his mind, but I had said what needed saying. Back home, Shadow was curled at the foot of the stairs, eyes on the door. He didn't move as I sat beside him, didn't flinch when I laid a hand on his head. He just breathed, slow, even. A dog who had once slept with one eye open now trusted someone enough to rest. "You did good today," I whispered, even when the world didn't deserve it. He blinked, then leaned into me, just slightly, but enough. That night I received a message that changed everything. It was from Claire Bennett, a woman I'd never met. Her brother, she said, had served in Afghanistan, was a K-9 handler, had been discharged after a mission went sideways, and he had a dog, a partner, Delta 7. "He's been off the grid," Claire wrote, "but I'll try to talk to him. He's never been the same since they told him his dog died. In action." My blood ran cold. They told him Shadow was dead. And now, the dog they left for dead was about to expose every lie. 3 days. That's how long I waited before Claire Bennett wrote back. Her second message was short. Just 6 words. "He wants to meet the dog." I stared at the screen like it might dissolve, then reread the sentence over and over until the words lost their shape. Claire sent me directions to a cabin in Blue Ridge, North Carolina. No phone numbers. No specific time. Just, "Come tomorrow, bring him, just you and the dog." I barely slept that night. Shadow curled beside me on the living room rug, his chest rising slow and even, unaware that we were about to walk straight into the past he couldn't speak of. By dawn, I had packed a duffel bag, water, food, a leash, and most important, a folder full of everything. His auction slip, his medical files, Dr. Mitchell's evaluation, Jake's notes, and the photos I'd taken the first week he came home. Bones visible under a coat dulled by fear. The drive up through the Blue Ridge was foggy and quiet. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert but calm, his amber eyes scanning the curves of the road as if he remembered every twist from another life. Maybe he did. Maybe memory doesn't die in dogs. Maybe it just waits. The cabin wasn't marked on the GPS. I followed Claire's directions, off the main road, then down a gravel path hidden by thick trees and silence, a mailbox without a name, a turn only visible if you knew it was there, and then suddenly we were there. Small log house, chimney curling smoke. No sound but birds. Shadow sat up straighter, ears perked. When the front door opened, I knew. The man who stepped out wasn't just anyone. He didn't walk. He limped. He didn't look. He scanned. He didn't breathe. He braced. And Shadow? Shadow made a sound I had never heard come out of him. Not a bark, not a whine, something between grief and wonder. He leapt from the truck before I could reach for the leash. And the man. He didn't flinch. Didn't shout. He dropped to his knees. Shadow crashed into him, tail slapping like a drum, nose buried in his handler's neck, body vibrating with disbelief. "Delta," the man said, voice cracking. "I thought you were dead." Marcus Cooper didn't speak much after that. Not at first. He just sat on the porch with Shadow at his feet, one hand on the dog's back, the other rubbing his own jaw like he was trying to ground himself in reality. Claire brought us all inside, a quiet cabin, sparsely furnished, fire crackling low. Marcus didn't talk until we were alone in the living room. No phones, no distractions. "I was told he died," he finally said. "After the ambush, they said he was killed protecting the team, that he ran into gunfire, that I shouldn't ask more." He swallowed. But that wasn't the whole story. November 2020. Kandahar Province final deployment. Marcus and Delta 7 Shadow were assigned to a pre-drone strike verification team. Their job? Identify targets, confirm identities, prevent civilian deaths. Shadow had picked up something wrong. Marcus said it was a scent change, a vibration in his behavior, before they entered a compound marked for clearance. Marcus reported it. The lieutenant overruled him. They walked in anyway. 6 men were killed in the ambush that followed. Marcus was evacuated with shrapnel in his leg and shoulder. Shadow had been wounded too, but they were separated. Standard medevac protocol. He never saw the dog again. "They told me he didn't make it," Marcus said, his voice flat. "But now I think they made sure I wouldn't ask questions." He stood then, walked slowly to an old cedar chest in the corner, unlocked it, pulled out a bundle of papers, a black flash drive, and a weathered metal tag. "This," he said, handing me the tag, "was mine. We had matching ones, me and Delta." I turned it in my hand. The number Delta 7, blood type, unit designation proof, real proof. The flash drive contained deployment logs, mission reports, handler assessments. But the most damning evidence was a transfer order, heavily redacted, showing that Shadow was handed over to a private contractor after Marcus was discharged. Cerberus Security Solutions. "They're dirty," Marcus said. "Pushing dogs past limits, training them for enhanced response without proper regulation." He pointed to one section of the report. 5 dogs, all reassigned. 2 later reported dead. 2 unaccounted for. And 1 sold for $1. I sat on the edge of the couch, stunned. The military hadn't just lied about Shadow's death. They'd buried him, erased him, and now that he'd resurfaced, as a hero in a flooded town, they were scrambling to silence the evidence. Marcus paced the room, firelight casting shadows on the walls. "I filed retirement papers for Delta before that mission," he said. "But someone pulled them, probably when they decided he was more valuable to someone else. You think that ambush was punishment? I think it was meant to make me disappear. And him too." Silence. Then he looked down at Shadow, who hadn't left his side since we arrived. "They failed. We spent the rest of the evening forming a plan. Marcus would remain in hiding, for now. Claire would overnight copies of the documents to Ben, Jake, and Dr. Mitchell. I'd prepare for the military's next move. They had come with polite orders last time. The next time, they might not knock." As I packed up to leave, Marcus reached for my hand. "Take care of him," he said. "He's safer with you. They're not watching me yet, but they will be." Shadow hesitated at the door, looked at Marcus, then at me, then padded over and placed himself between us, like he was choosing both somehow. "I'll bring him back to you," I promised. "When it's over." Marcus gave me a long, sad smile. "I don't know if it'll ever be over." The drive back from Blue Ridge felt longer than it was. Shadow sat straighter in the passenger seat now. Something in him had shifted after seeing Marcus, like a missing puzzle piece had quietly clicked into place. He looked less lost, more complete. But that wholeness came with a price. Because what Marcus gave me, the retirement papers, the transfer logs, the flash drive, was the kind of evidence that made powerful people nervous, and nervous people make dangerous decisions. When I pulled into my driveway just before dusk, Sheriff Winslow was already waiting. He didn't look up from his notepad until I stepped out of the truck. "They're coming back," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow, noon, court order in hand." My stomach dropped. "They're really going through with it?" Winslow nodded. "This time they're not just bringing paperwork. They've got an army transport, military police, and someone from D.C. Who?" He took a deep breath and handed me a small printout. Black SUV. Virginia plates. A man named Thomas Wilson. My fingers tightened on the paper. Ethan Bradley had mentioned that name. The fake veterans organization. The convenient website. The too many questions. "They're moving fast now," I murmured. "They're scared," Winslow said. "And when scared men hold power, they get reckless." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up organizing every scrap of evidence, every photograph of Shadow's injuries, every document Marcus had given me, every email from Dr. Mitchell, every media article about the flood rescue. I laid them out on the kitchen table like a war map. By 2 a.m., I knew what I had. It was enough to make noise. Maybe not enough to win in court, but enough to stall, and I needed to stall. Because Marcus wasn't just a source anymore, he was a target. At dawn, Jake Thornton arrived with coffee and a plan. "I've reached out to a few reporters," he said. "Military affairs, animal rights, they're interested but cautious." "Of course they are," I muttered. "No one wants to take on the Department of Defense." "They might," Jake replied, "if you give them the right photo op." "What do you mean?" "Make them show up with soldiers in suits and try to drag a decorated dog off your porch in front of half the county." I blinked. "You're saying, make it public." "I'm saying, give them a story they can't ignore." Ben arrived an hour later, just behind Dr. Harriet Mitchell. She had driven from the university herself. Her expression was calm, clinical, but I could see fire in her eyes. She examined Shadow again on the porch, documenting his progress since her first visit. "He's gained weight," she said, noting his muscle tone. "Movement in the hind leg has improved. Eyes are clearer. Coat's healthy." Then she looked at me. "But what stands out the most isn't physical." "What is?" "Eddie," I asked. "He trusts again. That's the real miracle." By 11:30 a.m., we were ready. I'd dressed in clean jeans and a collared shirt. Shadow sat at my feet, wearing the harness Marcus gave me years ago. Dr. Mitchell stood beside me, clipboard in hand. Jake leaned against the porch rail with folded arms. And Winslow? He parked his cruiser at the end of my driveway, lights off, hat pulled low, ready to step in, if things went bad. At 11:58, the military convoy pulled up. 3 vehicles, a marked military transport, a police escort, and a black SUV that gleamed like a threat. Thomas Wilson stepped out first. He looked exactly like I expected. Slick, polished, quiet menace in a suit. Lieutenant Harrington followed, flanked by 2 military police officers. Harrington looked uncomfortable. Wilson, in contrast, looked completely at home. He walked straight up to my porch like he'd rehearsed the moment. "Jessica Taylor?" he asked. His tone was pleasant. Too pleasant. "Yes. We're here to collect government property designated Delta 7. You've been briefed, I trust." His eyes flicked to Shadow, who had risen and placed himself between us. "No," I said clearly. "You're here to intimidate me, and to silence him." Wilson gave a polite smile. "Ms. Taylor, this isn't about threats. We have orders." I held up a folder. "Here's my order. Retirement documents filed by Staff Sergeant Marcus Cooper before their last deployment. Witnessed. Signed. Stamped." Harrington took a half step forward, glancing at the papers. "These look real?" I offered. "That's because they are." Jake handed Wilson a second folder. Also included photographs of Shadow's condition at the time of adoption. Notes from Dr. Mitchell here, a veterinary expert. Copies of auction records showing no attempt by any military agency to reclaim him, until after he made national headlines for saving a child's life. Wilson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, the way cornered animals assess distance before a bite. Then I dropped the final card. "Oh, And did I mention that Staff Sergeant Cooper is alive, well, and ready to testify? For the first time, Wilson blinked. Hard. Excuse me? He'll be here shortly, I lied. Total bluff, but I needed the pressure. Shadow stood beside me, tail still, shoulders tense, and I knew he sensed it too. We weren't just defending a dog anymore. We were standing against a system that believed could dispose of the broken, then reclaim them when convenient. Wilson turned to Harrington, voice clipped. We need to consult. Privately. They stepped aside. Whispers. Tension. Finally, the lieutenant returned. We're postponing the retrieval. Pending further review, he said quickly. You'll be contacted with additional instructions. No, we won't, I said. Because we're contacting the press. Wilson's jaw tightened. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. The SUV rolled out of the driveway, followed by the others, and as they left, Shadow exhaled, like a weight had lifted from his chest, from all of ours. But the war wasn't over. We'd won this battle, kept Shadow safe. For now. But I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever we'd uncovered went deeper than one dog. This wasn't just about a soldier and his K9 partner anymore. It was about secrets, silence, and what happens when people refuse to be silent any longer. And I was ready, because they had underestimated the bond between us. And that was their first mistake. The storm didn't hit right away. It never does. Like any real danger, it gives you that false sense of calm first. After Wilson's retreat, there was a strange stillness in the air, like Riverdale was holding its breath. But calm isn't safety. It's a warning I ignored, because for a brief, beautiful moment I thought we were done. Thought Shadow was safe, that Marcus was safe, that maybe, just maybe, we'd outrun whatever machine was chasing us. I was wrong, and it started with a rock. The first sign came late that evening. I was upstairs folding laundry, Shadow asleep by the door, when I heard the crash, the sound of breaking glass. I raced down to find the kitchen window shattered. Shards of glass glittered across the linoleum like sharp confetti, and sitting among them, wrapped in duct tape, was a rock. Attached to it was a single sheet of white paper, 5 words printed in thick, blocky letters. Stop digging or you're next. The message didn't shake. It screamed. I called Winslow. He arrived less than 10 minutes later, still in uniform, still calm, but now his eyes burned with something colder. Someone just upped the stakes, he muttered, inspecting the note. Thought Bradley was behind all this, I said quietly. But this doesn't feel like him. He shook his head. It's not. Ethan's gruff, stubborn, but he doesn't play like this, and besides, he glanced at the paper again. This reeks of government. My chest tightened. You think they're watching me? I think you've rattled someone, Winslow said, and that someone's not used to being rattled. He placed a call to Deputy Rodriguez, ordering a nighttime patrol outside my property. We'll keep an eye out, he said. But Jess, be careful. You're not just dealing with a dog custody case anymore. This is bigger, dirtier. I know, I whispered, because I could feel it. This wasn't just about Shadow anymore. This was about whatever they didn't want him to remember. Sleep that night was impossible. Shadow paced the hallways, ears perked, alert, but not panicked. It was as if he knew. Something was coming. I curled on the couch with a blanket, laptop open, rereading Marcus's documents for the 100th time, trying to find the thing that mattered most, trying to see what they were willing to burn barns and threaten lives to bury. Around 3 a.m., Shadow growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floorboards. I jumped up, heart hammering, and grabbed the flashlight. Together, we crept to the window. And then I saw it. Movement near the barn. Only, it wasn't the barn anymore. It was fire. Orange. Violent. Alive. The barn was fully engulfed before I could even dial 911. Flames snapped and danced like devils in the wind, eating through wood and roof in minutes. Shadow barked once, sharply, then stood guard beside me, his body between mine and the growing inferno. Within minutes, Winslow's cruiser skidded into the driveway. Sirens wailing behind him as Riverdale's volunteer fire crew arrived. They moved fast, but not fast enough to save the structure. It was gone. Ash. Smoke. Gone. After the flames were out, Winslow walked the perimeter with a flashlight. He returned. An hour later, face set like stone. Deliberate, he said, accelerants. Someone broke the lock, soaked the interior, and lit it up. I swallowed hard. The same someone who sent the note? Probably, he replied. Or someone working for them. My voice came out hoarse. This isn't about the dog anymore. Is it? Winslow looked at me, his eyes unreadable in the rising dawn. No, Jess, it's not. It's about what the dog knows. Later that morning, I moved Shadow to Ben's house temporarily. We needed space, safety, and for the first time since this all began, I felt fear. Real, cold, bone-deep fear, because I realized something. They were done playing. And if they couldn't take Shadow by law, they'd take him by force, or worse. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire Bennett. Marcus saw the news. He's ready to talk. Can you come to Blue Ridge tomorrow? Just you and the dog. I stared at the message, rereading it 3 times. Then I looked at Shadow, asleep on Ben's back porch. He looked peaceful, but his scars told a different story, a story they were trying very hard to erase. And suddenly I knew what had to happen. We're going, not just to visit Marcus, but to uncover the full truth. Because the fire, that wasn't just arson, that was a message, and this time I was ready to answer it. The Blue Ridge Mountains rise out of North Carolina like a secret held too long, silent, weathered, and full of stories no one dares speak out loud. As Shadow and I drove deeper into their misty folds, I kept one eye on the rearview mirror, not just out of caution, out of instinct. Because whatever was coming, whatever waited for us at the end of this road, I had a feeling it wouldn't just be a reunion. It would be a reckoning. Claire Bennett's. Directions were precise. A mailbox with no name. A gravel path nearly swallowed by forest. A cabin that barely looked lived in except for the curl of smoke from the chimney. I parked the truck and cut the engine. The silence hit like a wave. Shadow sat upright beside me, alert, nostrils flaring. Something in him recognized this place, or someone in it. He didn't tremble like before. He didn't growl. He waited. The cabin door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, early 30s, brown hair, wide, cautious eyes. Claire. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to, because when her gaze dropped to the dog sitting beside me, her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. It really is him. Before I could say a word, another figure appeared in the doorway, taller, broader, a beard shadowing his jaw and a limp in his step. But it was his eyes that caught me, sharp, haunted, and piercing blue. Just like the dog beside me, Marcus Cooper. Shadow saw him, and in the space between one breath and the next, everything changed. He leapt from the truck, not with aggression, but with purpose, with recognition, with joy. High-pitched whine broke from his throat, raw and full of longing. Marcus staggered down the porch steps like gravity was no longer a thing that applied. He dropped to his knees just as Shadow reached him. Delta, he choked, burying his face in Shadow's neck. I thought you were dead. Shadow didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't flinch. He leaned into the man like a missing piece sliding back into place. And in that moment, it didn't matter what the military said, didn't matter what they tried to erase. Because the truth was right there, lying in the dirt. Between a soldier and the dog they told him was gone. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and old books. Claire made tea. Marcus sat on the worn couch, Shadow's head resting on his thigh, unmoving. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, I said, voice low. Marcus shook his head. You came exactly when you needed to. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I told him everything, the auction, the rehabilitation, the town council, the fire, the threats, and now, the looming court order. He listened without blinking, without interrupting, and when I mentioned Wilson's name, something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "I know that name," he muttered, standing slowly. He limped over to a wooden trunk in the corner of the room, pulled out a journal wrapped in rubber bands and a small metal box. When he returned, his hands shook slightly, not with fear, but with restraint. "I wasn't just Shadow's handler," he said. "We were part of a team, a very specific team." He opened the journal, pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting, coordinates, names, notes. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "We weren't just finding IEDs, we were confirming drone strike targets." According to Marcus, Shadow's last mission wasn't routine. Their orders were to verify intelligence before a drone engagement. Standard protocol. But 3 times, he and Shadow flagged civilian compounds misidentified as enemy locations. 3 times, they called off strikes that would have killed entire families. After the 3rd one, Marcus said, voice flat, our CO was furious, said we were jeopardizing the mission. 2 weeks later, we were sent on that ambush run. I felt the pieces click into place. "You think it was a setup? I don't know what to think," he admitted. "But I know this. They told me Shadow was killed in a secondary explosion." He looked down at the dog beside him. They lied. Marcus pulled a flash drive from the metal box. "A friend in intelligence sent me this. Redacted, but enough to confirm Shadow, Delta 7, was transferred out of military custody to a private contractor, Cerberus Security Solutions." He looked me in the eye. "They never meant to return him. Dogs like Shadow, they're not just assets, they're witnesses." I thought of the scars, the limp, the night terrors, and the people who would rather burn barns than answer questions. "They wanted him silent," I whispered. Marcus nodded. "They almost succeeded. We talked for hours, made copies of every document, outlined the timeline of the ambush, the mission logs, the retirement paperwork Marcus filed, paperwork that mysteriously vanished from official records. And then Claire added one more piece. "I've been in contact with Watchdog," she said. "It's a nonprofit for military dogs. They're building a class action against improper retirements. Shadow's story fits." By the time I stood to leave, the sun had dipped behind the trees. Marcus knelt beside Shadow one last time. "You've always protected me," he said softly. "Now it's our turn." I turned to Marcus. "You should come with us." He shook his head. "Not yet. If they know I'm alive, they'll act faster. Let me stay hidden. Keep digging." He pressed something into my hand, a matching dog tag. His, mine, now, yours. On the drive back to Riverdale, Shadow didn't sleep. He sat alert, gaze fixed ahead, as if the mountains behind us had handed him a purpose he wasn't ready to let go of. And I realized something. He wasn't just remembering who he was. He was deciding who he'd be next, because this story, it wasn't over, not even close. We returned to Riverdale just before sundown. The sky was the color of bruised steel, the kind that promised storms, maybe of weather, maybe of something else. Shadow seemed different now, not skittish, not afraid, but sharper, more grounded, like something had clicked into place inside him after seeing Marcus again. His posture was confident, his gait steady despite the limp. And when he stepped onto the familiar gravel of our driveway, he paused, not to flinch or cower, but to look around, as if memorizing the terrain for battle. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was standing his ground. So was I. Because waiting for, just like Sheriff Winslow had warned, was trouble. Sheriff Winslow was already on the porch when we pulled in. His cruiser parked at an angle across the drive, lights off, engine quiet. His hat was off, tucked under one arm, and in his hand was a folder. "Jessica," he greeted me, voice low. "They're back, officially this time." He handed me the folder. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter from the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General's office. Court order attached. Signed. Stamped. Effective immediately. Military working dog Delta 7 is to be returned to federal custody pending review of his reassignment and service status. They'd escalated. No more veiled threats, no more polite requests. They were coming tomorrow at noon, with authorization and personnel to take Shadow. Winslow scratched the back of his neck, clearly uneasy. They brought a full packet this time. Transfer orders, not retirement, claiming Shadow was reassigned to a private training program, not decommissioned. I felt something hollow out inside me, a clawed kind of panic. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to erase him again. I clutched the folder tightly. We have until noon to prove they're lying. Winslow looked at Shadow, who had taken up position beside me like a sentinel. Then you'd better start digging hard, he said quietly, because they're not playing around anymore. When I stepped inside the house, the silence felt heavier than usual. Not the comforting quiet of home, the type of quiet that holds its breath, that waits. Shadow paced a circle near the kitchen door, ears twitching. I turned toward the dining table, ready to drop the folder and begin organizing counter documents, but I stopped cold. There, on the table, was an envelope. Plain, white, unmarked. It hadn't been there when we left for North Carolina. Picked it up with shaking hands and slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside, one sheet of paper, 5 words, printed in bold black ink. Stop digging or you're next. I stood frozen for a moment. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. This wasn't bluster anymore. This wasn't a disgruntled neighbor leaving a crude sign on the fence. This was a direct threat. Inside my home. They'd been inside my home. I called Winslow immediately. He arrived. 10 minutes later, with Deputy Rodriguez in tow. They swept the house with flashlights and careful eyes, looking for signs of forced entry. There weren't any. Whoever left the note hadn't broken in. They had a key, or knew how to bypass a lock. Winslow's face was tight with restrained fury as he stared at the note. "This crosses a line," he said. "No more watching from the sidelines. I'm posting a deputy outside your property tonight, armed. No exceptions." I opened my mouth to argue, to say it wasn't necessary. But then I remembered the barn, the fire, the men in the dark. They were escalating because they were scared, and scared men were dangerous. I nodded. "Thank you." That night I barely slept. Every creak of the old floorboards made my pulse spike. Every shadow outside the window felt like a presence. But Shadow stayed close, his body pressed to mine on the living room rug, his ears twitching at every sound. He didn't tremble, didn't hide. But his eyes stayed open long into the night, watching the dark like it owed him something. He didn't trust the silence. Neither did I. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep, made coffee, and started laying out every piece of evidence we had. Shadow's adoption papers, Ben's medical reports, photos from the flood rescue, the handler tag Marcus gave me, the mission logs, the service record, and, most importantly, the retirement document Marcus had buried beneath the woodpile behind his cabin. Signed, dated, and now in my possession. By sunrise, the kitchen table looked like a war desk. But the battlefield was legal. The IES enemy wore rank insignias and business suits, and the weapon I had was truth. I just didn't know if that would be enough. Around 6:30, my phone buzzed. A message from Ben. "I'm coming over, bringing someone. Be ready." An hour later, he arrived, with a woman in her early 50s, sharp eyes, professional posture. She introduced herself as Dr. Harriet Mitchell, professor of veterinary medicine at State University, specialist in military canine physiology and trauma recovery. She spent nearly an hour examining Shadow, his reactions, hate, physical scarring, and responsiveness to command. "He's had elite training," she confirmed. "German command structure, immediate response, no hesitation." She lifted one of his hind legs, gently flexing it. This fracture wasn't recent, but it was never set properly. Healed wrong. Painful. She looked at me gravely. This wasn't just neglect. It was abandonment after combat-related injury. "I can testify to that," Ben added. "Between my records and hers, we've got enough to push back." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "We'll need all of it. Because The army, and whatever was hiding behind Cerberus security, wasn't just coming for Shadow anymore, they were coming for the truth. The sun had barely passed its morning climb when the next wave of visitors arrived. Not neighbors, not friends, not law enforcement. They came in silence. 3 vehicles, 2 standard army transports and 1 black SUV with Virginia plates, pulled into my driveway at precisely 12 p.m., just like the court order promised. I was already standing on the porch with Shadow at my side. He stood tall beside me, chest forward, eyes steady. Not barking, not growling, just watching, like a soldier waiting for orders. Ben was seated at the kitchen table behind me, a stack of documents and photos ready. Dr. Mitchell stood near the window, arms crossed, calm but alert. Sheriff Winslow arrived moments later, his squad car parking at the edge of the gravel. He didn't turn on the lights, but the message was clear. He was here to witness, not interfere, not negotiate, but he wouldn't let it happen in the shadows. Lieutenant Harrington stepped out of the lead vehicle, same officer from before. This time he carried a briefcase and walked like he knew the ending already. Behind him were 2 military policemen, younger, stoic. Then the third man stepped out of the black SUV, not in uniform, tailored, navy suit, polished shoes, perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, hard eyes behind expensive sunglasses. This was the one. Thomas Wilson, Cerberus Security. I recognized the logo from the business card Ethan had given me. I recognized the posture from every deployment I'd ever served. He wasn't just a bureaucrat, he was a handler, just not of dogs. Miss Taylor, Lieutenant Harrington greeted, voice dry. We're here to retrieve military working dog Delta 7. His name is Shadow, I corrected, my tone firm. And he's not going anywhere. Wilson stepped forward, smooth as oil on tile. You're standing in violation of a federal order, he said. Interfering with government recovery of misallocated military assets carries penalties, including, let's cut the theater, I interrupted. I gestured to the table behind me. Inside, we have proof that Shadow was officially retired before your so-called reassignment. Signed documents, handler logs, medical records. Wilson didn't even flinch. Forged, most likely. They're not, came a calm voice from the driveway. Everyone turned. Sheriff Winslow was walking toward us, but he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, pale, unshaven, limping slightly, was Marcus Cooper. He looked like hell, but he was standing, alive, whole, and very much a threat to whatever secret Cerberus was trying to bury. Shadow saw him first. His posture broke. The discipline melted away. He bounded down. The porch stairs, tail whipping like a flag in the wind, paws pounding gravel. Marcus barely had time to brace before Shadow reached him, whining, pawing, nuzzling into his chest. He dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog's neck. It was the same scene I'd witnessed at the cabin, only now it happened in public, in broad daylight, in front of the very people who had tried to erase both of them. When Marcus looked up, his eyes were not gentle. They were steel. Lieutenant, he said, pushing to his feet. You've been given false orders. Sergeant Cooper, Harrington replied, stunned. We were told you were uncontactable. Yeah, I bet you were, Marcus replied, stepping toward the porch. I filed retirement paperwork for Delta Shadow before our final deployment. I have the documents. You can verify the signatures, the timestamps, the witness. He pulled a folder from his jacket. Unless, of course, those records were scrubbed after I was injured and separated from him without consent. Wilson's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. That silence told me everything. Marcus continued, his voice louder now, so the MPs and even the neighbors watching from across the street could hear. This dog saved American lives. He was injured in the line of duty. Then he was abandoned, labeled defective, sold like equipment. He turned to face Wilson directly. You tried to break him, but you couldn't. And now you want to erase him. I won't let you. Harrington glanced at the MPs behind him. They didn't move. Then he looked at Sheriff Winslow, who had his thumbs hooked into his belt and a camera crew waiting discreetly in a parked SUV. Yes, Winslow's bluff had become real. Ben had called in a local reporter who owed him a favor. Cerberus wasn't just facing resistance, they were facing exposure. Wilson removed his sunglasses slowly. "You've made your point," he said. "But understand this. The contract under which MWD Delta 7 was reassigned includes language that renders all personnel, canine or human, subject to non-disclosure. That includes you, Sergeant." "I'm not in the Army anymore," Marcus replied. "And I have no intention of staying silent." Wilson smiled, cold and sharp. "We'll see." Then without another word, he turned and walked back to his vehicle. Harrington followed, his briefcase unopened. The MPs trailed after them without a glance at Shadow, and just like that, the convoy pulled away. The driveway was quiet again. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Shadow trotted back to me, tail high, eyes shining. He wasn't confused this time. He knew we'd just won something important. Not the war, but a battle. And maybe that was enough, for now. Inside, Marcus dropped onto the couch like his bones were made of lead. "I didn't think they'd back off," he said quietly. "They haven't," I replied. "But now they know we're not afraid." Shadow curled beside him, head resting against Marcus's boot. We sat in silence for a while. Then I asked the question I'd been holding since he arrived. "Do you think they'll come again?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes," he looked at me, "but next time we'll be ready." That night, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like warning. Shadow stayed close, moving from window to window like he sensed something coming. Marcus fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to him. I sat in the kitchen, the lights low, flipping through the scanned documents we'd received from Claire. Everything was lined up. The retirement forms, the transfer logs, Shadow's service record, even a worn photograph of him beside Marcus in full gear. Both faces. Dirty but proud, we had evidence, we had a witness. But the people we were up against had something else. Power. And when power feels threatened, it burns things down, literally. It started just after 2 a.m. Shadow growled first. Low. Deep. The kind of growl that comes from memory. I froze. Every instinct in me from my combat years lit up. Then I smelled it. Smoke. I ran to the window, the barn. The damn barn was on fire. I grabbed the phone and dialed Winslow before I even shouted for Marcus. "There's a fire," I barked. "It's the barn," someone torched it. He didn't ask questions, just, "Get out, I'm sending everyone." Marcus was already throwing on his boots, Shadow right behind him, ears high, tail stiff. I stepped onto the porch just as flames burst through the roof of the barn. The sky, above it glowing orange and violent. It wasn't an accident. Someone had poured accelerant along the foundation. You could still see the black streaks on the gravel, oily and deliberate. The volunteer fire department arrived in minutes, but it was already too late. The barn was lost. Years of tools, supplies, memories, ashes. Winslow pulled up right behind, them climbing out of his cruiser with a jaw set in stone. His deputy Rodriguez flanked him, radio at her shoulder, eyes scanning the woods around us. "You okay?" Winslow asked. I nodded, then turned to the blaze. They wanted to send a message. "Yeah," he muttered. And they did. A firefighter jogged over, helmet off, face slick with sweat. Found the origin point, east wall, gasoline. Someone meant for it to catch fast. I didn't need confirmation. Cerberus hadn't backed off. They'd just changed tactics. By sunrise, the fire was out. The barn was gone. The deputy taped off the area and started her report. Winslow walked the perimeter. I stood in the wreckage with Shadow, the wind whipping ash around us. Marcus crouched beside what used to be his gear locker. "Just like Kandahar," he muttered. I knew what he meant. Fast, brutal, meant to destabilize, not destroy everything, just enough to rattle you, just enough to make you wonder if you should give up before they take something bigger. But they didn't know me, and they sure as hell didn't know Shadow. Back inside, Marcus turned to me. We need to assume they're watching the house. Your phone, the internet, maybe even the clinic. Already assumed, I replied, which is why I haven't sent anything digital. I reached under the floorboard where I kept the emergency safe. Hard copies, flash drives, photos, printouts. Everything was ready. We weren't just gathering evidence, we were building a defense. But it was more than that. This wasn't just about saving one dog anymore. It wasn't even about protecting a veteran who'd been wronged. It was about exposing the system that had built them up, used them until they cracked, then left them to rot in silence. And someone didn't want that system exposed. Later that morning, Emily and Ethan showed up again. Emily ran straight to Shadow, who wagged his tail and nudged her with his nose. She laughed. It was the first real laughter I'd heard since the fire. Ethan handed me a small envelope. "This was left on my porch," he said quietly. "Same handwriting as the note you got." Inside was a single photo, Shadow, taken at the flood rescue, from across the river. Grainy, but unmistakably him and Emily. On the back, 5 words in red ink. "He saves her once. Not again." I looked at Ethan. His expression was hard. "I was wrong," he said. "About the dog. About you. I don't know who's doing this, but I won't let them use my granddaughter as leverage." It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was close enough. Ben and Jake arrived an hour later. Jake had traced the SUV, black Virginia plates, to a Cerberus logistics facility outside of Atlanta. Private security, minimal oversight. The kind of place where records go in but don't. "Come out, you need to leave the house," Jake said. "Both of you, temporarily. This isn't just intimidation, it's escalation." I looked around. The ruined barn, the fire-scarred ground, the child being used as a pawn. He was right. I nodded. "We go tonight." "Where?" Marcus asked. "I've got friends upstate," Jake said. "Vets like us, off-grid, no Wi-Fi, no GPS, just trees and silence." I looked at Shadow. He was already at the door, like he'd heard enough. This wasn't running, it was repositioning, like every smart soldier does when under fire. Before we left, I walked into the remains of the barn one last time. Buried in the ash still warm, I found a piece of Shadow's original crate. The same crate from the auction, burnt, blackened, but still holding together. I brought it with me, not because it was useful, because it was proof. Proof of where he started, so we could remember just how far he'd come and how far we still had to go. We left Riverdale that night like fugitives, but we weren't running away. We were regrouping. Jake drove the lead truck. Marcus and Shadow rode with me. The highway stretched long and quiet under the moonlight. Every mile we put behind us felt like peeling off layers of tension, but not fear. That clung like a second skin. Shadow had his head out the window for a while, nose twitching in the cool air, but his eyes stayed locked on the road ahead. Focused. Sharp. Like he knew this wasn't over. Because it wasn't. The documents Marcus, buried under his cabin's woodpile, weren't just proof of retirement. They were something more. A key. Jake's friends lived deep in the Chattahoochee National Forest, on land that used to belong to a military survival school. No cell signal, no neighbors. Just a generator-powered cabin and a satellite phone for emergencies. Perfect, safe, untraceable. We unloaded the essentials, locked the gate behind us, and settled in for what we hoped would be only a few days. The 3 of us gathered at the dining table that night, the single overhead bulb casting sharp shadows over the piles of papers and USB drives we'd laid out. "This one's encrypted," Marcus said, holding up a black thumb drive. "I never cracked it. Came from a buddy before he was transferred overseas. He said if anything ever happened to him, I'd know what to do with it." "And did you?" I asked. "I didn't. Until now." Jake pulled out an old laptop he'd modified for offline. Use only. No Wi-Fi card, no Bluetooth, nothing that could ping a tracker. He connected the drive. The screen flickered. A password prompt appeared. Marcus leaned forward and typed slowly, DELTA 7 enter. Nothing happened. Then the screen went black. Held our breath. Lines of code began scrolling. Then a single folder appeared. Cerberus Ops, Tier 3 MWD Project is sensitive. Jake exhaled. Well, that's promising. We opened the folder. Inside were dozens of video files, reports, and redacted memos. Most were dated between 2019 and 2021, the same period Shadow had disappeared after Kandahar. I clicked one at random. The grainy footage showed a sterile training room, concrete walls, harsh lighting, 2 men in tactical gear standing beside a German shepherd with a muzzle. The dog was thin, restless, flinching at every movement. Not Shadow, but close. The voice on the recording said, "Subject has rejected advanced deterrence conditioning. Elevated cortisol. Aggression increases with each session. Recommend sedation for further testing." I clicked another file. This time, the camera focused on a dog lunging at a padded trainer while a loud alarm played. On repeat. The sound was unbearable, even through the tinny laptop speaker. Marcus looked away. "That's Cerberus," he muttered. "Their version of training. Break the dog down, then build it into something useful." No wonder he was trying to dig. "Through my living room floor during the thunderstorm," I whispered. Marcus nodded. "They use thunder as a trigger. Lightning was the cue for action. That's why he panics in storms. We worked in silence for hours." Jake printed what he could. I cataloged each file. Marcus sat with Shadow, the dog's head resting on his. Both of them exhausted in the same way. Deep in their bones but unwilling to sleep. We'd found what we needed. Now we had to figure out how to use it, because if we released the files, we'd be targets. But if we kept them hidden, Shadow might still be taken, under the false pretense of reassignment, obedience, or national security. We had truth, but truth without strategy is just noise. Just before dawn, Jake found something. A scanned memo dated March 2021 with a red Cerberus header. It referenced Asset D7, Shadow's designation. Subject: D7 displayed failure to comply with deterrence protocol. Handler deceased. Reassigned to surplus disposal. I felt my stomach turn. "Handler deceased?" I said. They reported, "Marcus dead?" He nodded grimly. "Which means Shadow was officially ownerless. No retirement, no adoption. Just disposal. That's why they could auction him. And if anyone asks," Jake added, "they'll claim it was a clerical error. Just another line item misplaced in a system too big to care. But we had the line item now. We had everything. The lies. The cover-up. The torture disguised as training." Shadow shifted in his sleep, whimpering. Marcus stroked his head gently. "I should have fought harder," he whispered. "No," I replied. "You survived. So did he. That's why we can fight now." Later, that morning I made a call. Not to the military, not to a lawyer. To someone I'd never met but had read about. Lena Stokes, investigative journalist. Specializes in veterans affairs and government misconduct. Her exposé on military burn pits had led to a congressional inquiry. I tracked down her secure line through a non-profit Jake worked with. I sent her a message with only one sentence. I sigh. "Have evidence of abuse and cover-up inside a classified military dog program. Please call me." She replied within 10 minutes. We talked for nearly an hour. I told her about Shadow, the auction, the evaluation, the fire, Marcus, Cerberus, everything. By the end, her voice was tight. "If this is what you say it is, it's huge, but they won't let it go easily." "They already haven't," I said. "They're threatening us. They tried to burn us out." "Then we go fast," she replied. "I'll need the documents, but more than that, I'll need Marcus's testimony. On record. Video, if possible." I looked at Marcus. He nodded once. It's time. We had turned a corner. This wasn't just a story about a dog anymore. It was about a system that eats its own and the people, human and animal, left behind in its wake. Shadow stretched beside us, his eyes opening just enough to catch mine. There was no fear in them anymore, only Purpose, he was ready and so were we. Lena arrived 2 days later. She didn't come with a camera crew or big city swagger. Just a weathered messenger bag, a digital recorder, and eyes that missed nothing. When she stepped into the cabin, Shadow was the first to greet her. He approached, slowly, ears forward, head low. Not submissive, just curious. Lena knelt without hesitation, let him sniff her hand, then scratched gently behind his ear. "You've got the look of someone who's been lied to a lot," she murmured to him. Shadow let out a soft huff and leaned into her touch. "Yeah," Lena added, glancing at me. "I know that look." We didn't waste time. The dining table became our command center again. Jake laid out the printed files. I handed over the Cerberus footage. Ben, who'd driven up just that morning, contributed Shadow's updated medical records with annotations from Dr. Mitchell. And Marcus, he sat quietly in the corner, hands clasped, staring at the recorder Lena placed on the table. "You ready?" she asked him gently. He nodded once. She pressed record. "My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Aaron Cooper," he began. "U.S. Army K-9 Unit, serial number 403. His voice was steady at first, professional, practiced. But as he continued, the armor began to crack. He talked about his deployments, about Shadow's training, about the way Delta 7 could sweep an alley faster than most machines, about how the dog once caught the scent of explosives buried beneath a rice sack 2 meters underground. Then he spoke about the ambush. His voice trembled when he recalled the blood, the screams, the shrapnel, how Shadow never left his side even as gunfire tore through the dust, how the last thing he saw before blacking out was Shadow lunging, not at an enemy, but over his body, shielding him. "I was supposed to protect him," Marcus whispered. "Instead, they told me he died." He paused. "I mourned him for 3 years. Lena didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Her recorder caught every breath, every silence. Then I saw his photo in a newspaper, beside a little girl he'd rescued in a flood. They called him Shadow, but I knew him by a different name. Delta, Lena said softly. Marcus nodded. Delta 7, my partner, my responsibility. We broke for air after the first hour. Lena stepped outside to take a call. I followed her, cradling a mug of coffee in both hands. She lit a cigarette, offered me one. I shook my head. "So?" I asked. She exhaled a long plume of smoke. "This story's explosive, but that's the problem." "What do you mean?" "Stories like this. They don't stay in the news cycle. They get buried, discredited, twisted." She looked out toward the woods. "They'll say Marcus is unstable, that the documents are fakes, that Shadow is just a stray with a good story." I stayed quiet. "But," she added, "if we go public the right way, with supporting voices, expert analysis, undeniable proof, we don't just get people talking. We force someone to answer." Back inside, Marcus was ready to continue. "This time we filmed." Jake set up a DSLR with a soft LED light. The frame was tight, just Marcus and Shadow sitting side by side. One scarred man, one silent dog, both veterans, both survivors. He told the same story, but slower now, with more weight. He named names, dates, locations. He recalled exact phrasing from briefings and conversations. He held up the retirement paperwork, the altered logs, the Cerberus files. By the end of the testimony, Lena's eyes were rimmed with red. She clicked off the camera. "Do you realize what you just did?" she asked. Marcus looked at her, his voice calm. "I told the truth. We uploaded encrypted copies of the footage to 3 separate servers. Jake contacted a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protection. Lena began drafting the article. But as we worked, we all knew one thing. The clock was ticking. Cerberus wouldn't sit still. The military wouldn't let this leak without consequence. And someone out there had already shown they were willing to burn a barn and threaten lives to keep these secrets buried. That night, I took Shadow for a walk along the tree line behind the cabin. The sky was clear. Stars stretched wide and infinite. Shadow moved easily now, confident, relaxed, free. "Tomorrow," I said softly, "the world's going to know who you are." He looked up at me, eyes glinting. I smiled. No more hiding. Just before dawn, Lena packed up her gear. "You'll get a call from my editor before noon," she said. "The piece goes live tomorrow morning, front page." "You think it'll matter?" I asked. "It already does." She paused, then pulled something from her bag. A small laminated tag. "My uncle served in Vietnam, came home with nothing but a medal and a limp. Spent the rest of his life fighting for health care no one wanted to give him." She handed me the tag. "Remind them we don't forget." An hour after Lena left, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the property. Not military, not local law enforcement, but familiar, the same make and model that had stalked my house before. Jake grabbed his rifle. Marcus stood without a word. Shadow was already at the door, ears up, tail stiff. We weren't running anymore. This time, we were ready. The SUV didn't move. It just sat there, engine idling, black paint glinting under the early morning sun. But something about it sent every hair on my body standing upright. Jake stood to my left, rifle slung but ready. "That's them," he muttered. Marcus didn't say a word. He just reached down and placed a steadying hand on Shadow's back. The dog responded instantly, falling into a silent, alert posture, eyes locked on the vehicle, body coiled like a spring. "Are we expecting a knock?" I asked, heart thudding. "No," Jake said, scanning the woods. "These guys don't knock." Then the SUV door opened. A single man stepped out. Tall. Civilian clothes, but military bearing. No sunglasses, no hat. Just a calm, unreadable face, and eyes that scanned our property like a predator assessing terrain. He didn't approach. He just stood beside the vehicle and waited. "You know him?" I asked Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly. "His name's Boone. Used to run field compliance for Cerberus. The kind of guy who can quote protocol while dragging you into a black site." Jake lowered his rifle, but didn't relax. "I'll handle it." "No." Marcus took a step forward. "This is mine." We followed him halfway to the tree line, stopping within speaking distance, but far enough to show we weren't afraid. Boone didn't flinch when Marcus called out, "Long time, Boone." Boone's expression didn't change. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should Delta 7 have ended up in a cage at a livestock auction. But here we are." Boone's eyes flicked to me, then Jake, then back to Marcus. "You're making this worse for yourself. Walk away. You don't need to go down with the dog." "He's not the one going down," Marcus said evenly. "I've already given my statement to the press. They've got the files. Shadow's medical records, retirement papers, the footage." Boone's jaw tightened. "Then you know what you've done?" "I've told the truth," Marcus replied. "Try doing that for once." For the first time, Boone's face cracked. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not fear, something colder. Calculation. "You don't understand the forces you're playing with. And you don't understand what this dog means to people now." I cut in. "He's not just a soldier anymore. He's a symbol. You try to disappear. Him again, you'll have more than a lawsuit. You'll have a movement." Boone looked at me like I was a child. "You think public opinion protects you? That a Facebook group and a vet clinic in Georgia are going to stop what's coming?" Jake took a step forward. "We've stopped bigger things with less." Boone glanced at his watch, then nodded once to himself. "I've delivered the warning." Then he turned and got back into the SUV. The engine purred, the tires rolled, and the vehicle disappeared down the gravel road like it had never been there at all. But the silence it left behind was heavy. Back inside, we didn't speak for several minutes. Even Shadow seemed unsettled, pacing by the windows, ears twitching at every sound. "They won't come back with polite words next time," Jake said finally. "That was their last knock." "What's the next move?" I asked. Ben, who had just arrived with Dr. Mitchell, walked in and looked around at our tense faces. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "The cavalry stopped by. We filled him in. When we were done, Dr. Mitchell placed a stack of notarized documents on the table. These are my official statements regarding Shadow's condition and training. I've also contacted the Georgia State Veterinary Board. They're opening an inquiry into how a military working dog was released without appropriate discharge protocol. Jake nodded. Good. That builds pressure. Marcus sat at the end of the table, silent. Marcus, I said. He looked up, but his face was somewhere else. When Boone looked at me, it was like I was back in that last debriefing room. One-way glass, fluorescent lights. Two men who kept using the phrase, necessary ambiguity. I never realized until now how much of my life I let them erase. Shadow rested his head on Marcus's foot. That small contact seemed to anchor him. We can't stop, Marcus said quietly, no matter what they do next. We won't, I promised, and you're not alone anymore. By afternoon, Lena's article had gone live. It wasn't just a piece, it was a bombshell. Hero K9 abandoned after combat now at center of military scandal. The headline alone lit up Twitter and veteran forums across the country. Within hours, our justice for Shadow was trending. Major newspapers picked it up. National cable news started calling Ben's clinic. Military watchdog organizations reached out for interviews. Several retired generals publicly demanded an investigation. But the real gut punch came from the video. Lena had edited Marcus's testimony into a tight, emotional 6-minute clip that ended with Shadow placing his paw gently on Marcus's hand. The final caption read, "He served with loyalty. He was discarded in silence. Now the world knows." The clip went viral within 12 hours, over 2 million views, thousands of comments, hundreds of people sharing photos of their own retired military dogs, and donations. Ben's GoFundMe too. Defend Shadow legally raised $150,000 in 2 days. That night, we sat on the porch as dusk fell. The air buzzed with the weight of everything that had changed. Lena called just before midnight. "They're scrambling," she said. DOD issued a statement claiming clerical errors. Cerberus went dark. Their PR firm won't return calls. Any word from Boone? No. But Jessica, watch your back. I didn't sleep. Shadow didn't either. He laid beside my bed the entire night, silent, still, awake, and ready. Morning arrived gray and still, like the world was holding its breath. Marcus was already awake, sitting at the table with Shadow at his feet, sorting through folders of documentation, some pages smudged from being handled too many times. The far light from the window caught the edge of the handler tag he wore around his neck, a silent badge of everything they'd endured. Jake poured coffee like it was fuel, while Ben scrolled through a dozen alerts on his phone. CNN wants a quote. He muttered, "So does NBC. I've got 5 interview requests in my inbox. You've kicked the hornet's nest." "Good," Marcus said without looking up. "Maybe now someone will notice the bees." But even as the media storm swelled, a more immediate threat loomed. Cerberus was quiet, too quiet, and that silence felt more dangerous than their veiled threats. I sat across from Marcus, pushing a plate of untouched toast aside. "They won't try to spin this?" "They'll spin it," Marcus said, "but not through public statements. They'll shift blame, bury files, maybe throw one mid-level officer under the bus. What they care about is containment. That means cutting loose ends," Jake grunted. "Which could mean us." No one disagreed. At noon, Sheriff Winslow arrived. This time he didn't knock, just opened the door and stepped inside like someone who had run out of patience. "They're back," he announced grimly. "And they've got federal marshals with them." Ben's face paled. "Actual marshals?" Winslow nodded. "They're saying Shadow is federal property now, being claimed under emergency reassignment powers. They're citing Homeland Security." "That's a smokescreen," Jake growled. "I know it," Winslow said, his voice hard. "But smokescreens buy them time, and they've come armed with more than just paperwork this time." "How long do we have?" I asked. 15 minutes, Winslow replied. "Maybe less." Marcus stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Then we make our stand now. We didn't run. We didn't hide. We prepared." Jake took position near the porch, eyes on the road. Marcus stayed with Shadow, rechecking his collar and leash, whispering low commands into his ear. The dog sat perfectly still, calm, alert, ready. Printed copies of the retirement papers, medical affidavits, press statements, and laid them out on the porch table like evidence in a courtroom. We would meet them in the open, on record. On camera, Ben set up his phone to live stream. "We go dark," he said. "They'll know something happened." And then we waited. The convoy arrived at exactly 12:13. 2 government SUVs, 1 black van, 1 unmarked car that reeked of Cerberus. Man stepped out of the lead vehicle. Slick suit, aviators. Hair too perfect, definitely not military. Wilson upped again. He was flanked by 2 federal marshals in full gear, expressions impassive. But I could see it in their posture. They didn't like this assignment. Wilson, on the other hand, looked like he was about to order lunch. "Miss Taylor," he greeted, voice too smooth. "We're here to take custody of Delta 7 under federal. Statute 48103. Emergency reassignment due to national security." "Stop," I interrupted, raising my phone. "You're being recorded. Identify yourself and your agency." Wilson smiled like a man who liked cameras. "Thomas Wilson, Special Advisor to Cerberus Security, contracted through the Department of Defense." "And under what legal authority? Are you requesting a retired military dog that was auctioned as surplus and subsequently adopted through legal county procedure? Delta 7 was improperly processed," he said coolly. "That error has now been corrected." "No," Marcus said, stepping forward. "That error was engineered. He was retired. I filed the paperwork myself." Wilson's gaze hardened. "You're a disgraced former handler with PTSD. I'm not interested in your accusations." "Then maybe you're interested in this," I said, holding up the notarized copy of the retirement certificate. Signed, dated, logged, lost mysteriously, until now. Ben stepped beside me. "And this," he added, handing over a medical affidavit. "Proof of abuse, malnutrition, trauma inconsistent with standard training. You want to take this dog, you better be ready to explain these injuries to a federal court and the public." Wilson took the papers without looking at them. "We'll settle this in court." "No," Marcus said, voice low but steady. "You'll settle it right here." At that moment, Shadow stood, not growling, not aggressive, just rising, steady, tall. A presence. Every eye turned to him. The marshals shifted uneasily. Even Wilson hesitated. Shadow didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He just moved to stand between Marcus and Wilson, eyes locked. And for the first time, Wilson blinked. "This is insane," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "What's insane is that a decorated war dog had to be saved at a livestock auction. What's insane is that you thought nobody would notice. You're blowing up something that could have stayed buried." I stepped forward. "That's the point. We're not burying it. Not anymore." A long silence followed. Then one of the marshals spoke. "Sir," he said to Wilson, "we're not taking that dog today. Not without a direct court order. And not with all these witnesses." Wilson turned on him. "We have jurisdiction." "You have a mess," the marshal cut in. "And I'm not dragging a dog away on live stream for a private contractor. We're done here." Wilson looked like he wanted to explode. Instead, he turned and stormed back to his car. The convoy retreated, and once again, we'd held the line. Back inside, the adrenaline crash hit hard. Ben slumped into a chair. "That wasn't just a legal bluff, that was war." Jake nodded. "And we just won another battle." "But they'll come again," Marcus said. "We'll be ready," I replied. I looked down at Shadow, who had curled up quietly beside Marcus again, eyes closed, breathing even, like he knew. The next 48 hours moved like a hurricane with a name. Shadow's story hit national news, not a side column piece, not buried under politics or sports scores, front-page headlines. Hero K9 abandoned, nearly reclaimed by force, handler fights back. The $1 dog who exposed a billion-dollar secret. Cerberus security under investigation for alleged abuse of military working dogs. CNN, NBC, even 60 Minutes requested interviews. Every image of Shadow beside Marcus, calm, alert, alive, struck something deep in the American consciousness. People didn't just see a dog anymore. They saw a veteran, a survivor, a victim of a system that had quietly failed those it was supposed to honor. I sat beside Marcus on the porch, watching Shadow roll lazily in a patch of clover. It was the first time in weeks that his body language screamed peace. The nervous tics were gone. The flinches, the growls, the midnight panics, gone. "You think this is over?" I asked Marcus quietly. He shook his head. "It's just starting," and he was right. By the end of that week, Senator Holt from Georgia called a press conference. "We owe it to our veterans, both human and canine, to ensure they are never discarded like equipment," she said, holding up Shadow's auction record. "This is a disgrace. I'm calling for a full investigation." The next day, footage leaked from inside a Cerberus training facility, shaky cell phone video, cages, shouting, dogs in shock collars, shaking in corners. It was undeniable. Even the military couldn't spin it. Marcus was summoned to Washington, not as a defendant, but as a witness. He testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. Clean suit, straight spine, Shadow at his heel. The entire nation watched as Marcus spoke, not with outrage, but with a kind of quiet grief that couldn't be faked. "They told me Delta died," he said into the microphone. "But it was easier to bury the dog than admit the truth about what happened that day. About the orders we questioned, about the lives we saved by disobeying." He paused. "I didn't save Delta. Jessica Taylor did. But he saved me first, every day in combat. He was my partner. He still is. I wasn't in the chamber, but I watched it live, gripping the arms of my chair as tears rolled silently down my face. And I wasn't alone." The internet exploded. Justice for Shadow, for veterans deserve better. Not just a dog, thousands of veterans came forward with stories of their canine partners. Some still missing, others lost to bureaucratic neglect. A class action suit was filed. Cerberus contracts were suspended pending investigation. And Shadow became the face of it all. We were invited to the White House. Shadow wore a simple blue ribbon around his collar. He wasn't there for medals. He was there as a symbol. When the president bent to stroke his head, Shadow didn't flinch. "He's not broken anymore," Marcus whispered, and I believed him. But the moment that sealed it all came quietly, one morning in Riverdale. Emily Bradley stood at the community center's stage, holding a handmade poster that read, "This dog saved my life, please don't forget him." The crowd was silent, then applause, thunderous, unstoppable. And Ethan Bradley, once Shadow's biggest enemy, stood with tears in his eyes, hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. Jake's rehab center, Second Chance K9, received $1 million high-E donation from a foundation that had never donated to anything dog-related before. Veterinary programs began integrating PTSD rehabilitation for canines into their curriculum. Ben was offered a teaching post, but declined. Riverdale's got all. "The learning I need," he said with a grin. "And me? I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I finally understood that helping Shadow heal wasn't about rescuing a dog. It was about rescuing something in myself, something I didn't know was broken until I saw it reflected in his eyes." That summer, Marcus built a cabin not far from mine. He named it Delta Point. He and Shadow hiked every morning, the dog bounding through woods like he was 5 years younger. Cooper, my old lab, passed peacefully that fall. We buried him near the garden, Shadow sitting beside the grave for hours. Max and Ruby, my cats, eventually stopped glaring at him. Mostly. People started visiting Riverdale, not for the diner's pancakes or the football games, but to meet the dog who'd brought a community together and a system to its knees. Shadow didn't bark for cameras, didn't pose, but he walked calmly, confidently, beside Marcus or me. He let the children pet him. He sniffed old boots left at the community memorial and sat quietly beside them, as if mourning the handlers who never made it home. Because he remembered. He always remembered. One evening, as the sun sank behind the Georgia pines, Marcus and I sat on my porch, watching Shadow doze in a pool of golden light. "You ever think he forgave us?" Marcus asked softly. I looked down at the dog, his breathing steady, tail flicking in a dream. "I think he never blamed us," I said. "I think he just waited until we were ready to do what was right." Marcus nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the twin of the tag he'd given me. "Time to return this to where it belongs," he said. And together we hung both tags, his and Shadow's, on the community's new wall of service. A tribute not just to those who fought, but to those who were forgotten, until now. Shadow sleeps at the foot of my bed now, not because he needs to, but because he chooses to. And every time I wake from a nightmare, he's there, solid, steady, breathing slow and sure, anchoring me back to the present. He doesn't flinch anymore, not at thunder, not at strangers, not at his own name. The dog who once cowered in corners now runs the length of our property with a kind of joy that feels like defiance. But even in his peace, he remains a sentinel, not of danger, but of memory. Shadow will always remember the cages, the lies, the betrayal, and so will I, because this isn't just a story about a dog. This is a story about what happens when those we trust with our lives turn away, when it's no longer convenient to care. It's about systems that bury their guilt in paperwork, about quiet heroes who are expected to carry the weight of nations and then be forgotten. And it's about how healing begins, not in headlines, but in one person saying, "You matter. I see you. You're not done yet." There are still questions left unanswered. We still don't know who gave the order to erase Shadow's records. We still don't know how deep Cerberus Security's contracts go, or who in the Department of Defense signed off on their enhanced deterrence program. And most of all, we still don't know what really happened during that last mission in Kandahar. But Marcus is ready to find out. So am I. So is Shadow. We've submitted everything to Watchdog, the non-profit building the class action case. Marcus has been asked to testify again, this time in front of an international human rights panel looking into wartime animal ethics. And rumor has it, Cerberus isn't done either. They've gone quiet, too quiet, but we're not afraid, not anymore, because we've built something stronger than silence. We've built truth, and truth once spoken has a way of spreading. So if you think Shadow's story ends here, it doesn't. It's just beginning. There are more Shadows out there, dogs like him, discarded, abandoned, erased, and there are more Marcus Coopers too, veterans with no place to put their pain, told to move on from wounds that still bleed. But together, we're building something bigger, a network, a voice, a reckoning. So stay with us, follow the next part of the journey, because in the next episode we follow a new lead. One that takes us back into the heart of darkness, where Shadow was nearly broken for good, a hidden base, a missing handler, and the real reason Cerberus wants Shadow silenced. What we uncover next might shake everything. So turn on your notifications, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is far from over, we'll see you in the next chapter.